I'm Bill Auten of Auten Claims Management.
I'm Chantal Roberts of CMR Consulting, and welcome to the Art of Adjusting podcast.
Today, we're going to talk about life as an insurance adjuster from the perspective of property, auto, liability, or workers' compensation adjusters. Our goal is to bring interesting topics in the world of claims adjusting to people who are working as an adjuster now and to people who are considering a career as a claims adjuster. Hey, Chantal, sounds like we have an interesting topic today. We're going to talk about something called MIST and in a claims investigation. From what I understand, and what I've read a little bit about this is that this was something started by Allstate Insurance. That might not be correct.
Yeah,
So,
I've actually heard that too.
okay, so what can you tell me about MIST claims? What does that mean?
So, MIST stands for minor impact soft tissue. And I was, of course, a MIST adjuster. We didn't call ourselves MIST, but I was a MIST adjuster when I was working at MetLife. And what we would do is take these motor vehicle accidents where the property damage was relatively low, maybe like $1,500 or something like that. And the claimant, though, is claiming a bulging disc or a herniated disc, or they have months and months and months of physical therapy or chiropractic therapy. And it just seems like the physical or the bodily injury is out of whack or not in
Inconsistent with the amount of
yeah,
damage? Yeah.
exactly.
Okay.
And so it occurred to me that if some of our newer adjusters, our younger adjusters, aren't familiar with maybe mold claims or whatever, they may not be familiar with missed claims as well. So I wanted to bring that up to everybody's attention.
Sure. Now, when you have a minor impact with between vehicles, let's say, um, and what kind of like, can you give an example of the damage that you would consider a missed claim versus some other collision claim where you've got significant damage? Are we talking about scratches on a bumper, or are we talking about a bumper that may be pushed in? Like what is the threshold?
Yeah. Back in the day when I used to handle claims, and I tell my RMI class about this, like back when dinosaurs ruled the world, and I was, writing on clay tablets and everything.
And pagers.
Yeah, exactly. We would look for the impact absorbers underneath the bumpers to see if the impact had actually moved the bumper at all. But
The
nowadays, I mean,
pistons, they were inside those bumpers. There's pistons that compress, and
yeah,
I think it's a 5 mile an hour threshold for those.
yes. In fact, I talk about that in the article where there used to be a lot of testing done on this, but they stopped. The highway department had stopped testing for low impact in like 2004. So now the insurance industry doesn't have this scientific background that we can use to combat these sorts of things, but we'll talk about that later. Anyway, now some of the bumpers are made of what, like carbon fiber or just plastic. And it looks a lot worse than it is, because if you maybe bump it, your whole bumper could crack or whatever, or dent, but that doesn't necessarily mean it is a bad or a severe bodily injury kind of claim. So usually what we look at is the amount of property damage. Usually, to put a hard and fast rule on it, there's like $1,500 worth of damage, or $2,000, maybe even $5,000. It's not going to be a lot. Not going to be a lot.
So those bumpers, they are thin and they're very prone to punctures in many cases. Unless you're talking maybe about a big truck that has a steel bumper of some sort. But most of the cars today, sedans, even SUVs, will have these plastic kind of enclosures. A puncture can happen with really no sense of impact at all, and it could make that bumper look like it's been through the ringer, and the car probably didn't even move that much.
Right. Yeah.
So
And
I get that argument. Um, what I'm concerned about is that when there is a blanket standard applied to these missed claims of either dollar amount in damage or some other objective, visual cue that you're looking at, does that miss the mark in some cases where, yeah, there actually is minimal damage, but somebody really did get hurt for whatever reason?
Yeah, absolutely. I actually had a friend of mine who was involved in a missed claim, or it was labeled as a missed claim. But what had happened is that the car who rear-ended her had actually gone underneath the bumper and hit the frame. So the impact did not look that bad, but when the frame was hit, it was much more jarring than what we would experience with our impact absorbers. Because even though we don't have these pistons with the bumpers, now we have the styrofoam cushions or whatever else we kind of need to take the impact, because that's what a bumper is supposed to do. It's supposed to like cushion the entire car. And this is where, of course, what we're doing at the Art of Adjusting, where we're trying to educate these adjusters, like even though you may see a property damage claim of $500, for example, we need to look and see, well, did the damage actually go underneath, hit the frame? And so therefore there is a lot more damage to be had.
When it comes to bad faith and unfair claims practices, do you see any exposure when utilizing the missed method of evaluating these claims? And what should carriers be cognizant of when they're looking at them?
Yeah, actually, that's a great, great question, because the plaintiff counsels and the doctors that are retained by plaintiff counsels often say and allege that as soon as the insurer has labeled this claim as a low impact or a minor impact claim, they're going to begin lowballing this claim. And so that is why the adjuster still needs to perform all of the investigation techniques that they've always been using. And in the article that I wrote for CPCU Insights, I actually used the acronym so that adjusters can remember this as MIST, meaning measure, investigate, suspicion, and thoroughness. And that's actually going to hit a lot of your Unfair Trade Practice Act rules and regulations, or your good faith claims investigation.
Okay, so it doesn't mean you're acting in bad faith if you're labeling this as a low impact claim, but you once you do that, you need to go through the motions of actually conducting a thorough investigation to verify what your suspicions are based on the minimal information you're getting from the look of the bumper, or whatever other evidence you have that this is a minor impact claim.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. Think about it's really no different than investigating like an arson claim, for example. You have suspicion of an arson. That's not necessarily bad faith. If you said, okay, I've got suspicion of an arson, we have a suspicion that this is a low impact soft tissue injury. We may label it as an arson, or we may label it as a missed claim, and even transfer it over to a missed unit or an arson or the SIU, the Special Investigations Fraud Department, for them to do a little bit more investigating. But we are still handling that claim and still doing our investigation.
Interesting. So I had done a podcast on confirmation bias, and I'm thinking about that now in this context, that if you as an adjuster, if you're given a claim by your supervisor and it's already got the label that this is a missed claim, what should an adjuster be careful about so that they're not locked into that minor impact mindset that will kind of muddy the waters, or not muddy the waters, but
Confirm their bias that
yeah,
that it
that's
is.
there's a word I can't think of it. Prejudice,
Yeah, yeah,
never mind. We're not even going to say that word.
I understand.
That's going to affect their ability to make a proper decision on the claim, because they've got it in their head already that, no, this is a minor impact claim. They must be faking their injury. Now, I'm not pro, plaintiff here, but I have been doing this long enough to know that there's two sides to every story, and somewhere in the middle is the truth.
Yes.
And if you get this minor injury label, as soon as you get a claim, and you get the attorney on the other side saying that this person now is disabled for at least 90 of the first 180 days after the accident. So you've got two like opposing opinions here about the severity of the injury. And I think as an adjuster, we have to be cognizant that these labels, while helpful, may not always be correct.
Yeah. Yeah. One of the things that adjusters can do is, and this is under T for thoroughness, is continuing on with their investigation and making sure that they get all of the documents that are needed. So for example, in that first phone call, I talk about when you're talking to the claimant or doing, you have to do a recorded statement. These are claims that you will want to do a recorded statement on. And one of the things that you need to be asking the claimant is, do you have any previous injuries? I mean, this claimant may be what we call colloquially in the industry an eggshell claimant, which means a claimant that happens to have previous injuries, and a minor bump may actually hurt them, quite frankly. And so we need to be cognizant of that fact. The fact that an elderly woman, grandma, would likely be more injured in a minor impact than a 21-year-old or an 18-year-old who is in the prime of their life. That's something that we need to be cognizant of. One of the things I talked about is, when we're talking about this recorded statement, you don't just ask questions that will quote unquote trap the claimant. You are conducting an investigation. Also ask the claimant if they've been off work. A lot of times they have, but what I always asked for was the doctor's note that allowed them to be off from work. And most of the time they don't have that. And this is sending also a very clear message to the claimant and their attorney, if they have one, that just because you got rear-ended or T-boned or whatever, this is not a payday. But if you've got it, send it to us. We take that into consideration.
I would say too that when you're taking that statement or reviewing medical records or whatever you're doing in the course of your investigation, that you're not necessarily investigating with the mindset that you're trying to prove it's a misclaim, that you make sure you're open-minded enough to investigate, not only to prove that it might be a claim that's not as severe as they're making it out to be, but that you're also investigating the other side. Because if you miss something, you're going to put your employer, as the insurance company, through a lot of grief, that unnecessary grief, because here you're trying to make this case that you've decided that this is a minor injury, and you're overlooking things because of confirmation bias. And I know I'm playing, the other side of the coin here for many adjusters and defense attorneys, but what I want to do at the end of the day is resolve a case, not send every one of them to litigation.
Oh, absolutely.
So, and I also want to avoid bad faith. And I think that there's a lot of opportunities to stumble down that road if you're not careful with this labeling kind of mechanism. So my advice is to be thorough on both sides. Yeah, you definitely want to find out if this is a fake injury or if it's being embellished or whatever. But don't ignore the signs that it really is something serious that you need to, have substantial reserves for. So,
Absolutely. Yeah, no, I totally agree with that. And in fact, you had mentioned uh doing the due diligence of looking at both sides of it. And like I said, you still need to get all of that documentation. You still need to do that recorded statement, because at the end of the day, what we as adjusters have is the duty to pay a claim that the insured is legally liable for. And I talk about that in the article as well. The insured has become legally liable, and so they are going to owe something. So for us as adjusters to mess around and not pay that, that's not what we're here for. We're not here to trap the claimant. We're not here to trick the claimant into saying that they're not injured when they really are, or whatever. However, on the flip side, we're also not here to overpay a claim or to pay an unjustified claim. We're here to pay what is owed when it's owed. And if our insured is liable, which obviously we've already accepted liability for that, then we need to pay that claim.
lowballing is, I see both sides of the coin when it comes to lowball claims or lowball allegations that the adjuster is trying to cheat the claimant out of something that they deserve. And I've seen it happen in action where it really was a situation where the um, an inappropriate offer was made to settle because the claim was actually worth more than what the adjuster was thinking. So, but I also see on the flip side, I see attorneys who believe that that a very minor injury is worth $1 million. So, that goes both ways. But there's no bad faith for making $1 million claim.
No,
So,
and I think this is where the measurement, the M comes in, and the missed technique is this is when we're going to be measuring. For example, when I was handling the low impact claims, I asked the field adjuster or the field estimator to go out and take a ruler to the claimant's bumper and to the insured's bumper. And these damages should meet. And if they don't, this should create that suspicion, which is what the S is. And the suspicion, I even say in the article, is not, again, this is not where we lowball or try to trick the claimant. This is just having that healthy dose of, well, this doesn't make sense. What's the common sense approach here? And that's really what I'm trying to teach the younger adjusters who may be reading this or hearing about this for the first time is let's take a common sense approach. I actually interviewed a gentleman who was handling low impact claims, minor impact claims much later or more recently than when I had. And he said out of, I think it was 40 claims, something like that, that he had sent to court. He got defense verdicts on 38, and I may be wrong with that number, but I do remember there were 2 that came back and the jury only gave medical because they could look at the pictures and the measurements and see, this doesn't make sense.
interesting.
Yeah.
So I'd like to switch gears a little bit, staying on the same topic of missed, but with respect to the severity of the injury and the injury thresholds that apply in certain states.
Yeah.
What are you seeing? How are attorneys overcoming those thresholds?
So a lot of instances, what they're doing is they now have doctors who are automatically kind of like preloading the demand letters in by saying this chiropractor or this osteopath or whatever is saying that these low impact claims can indeed injure a person who is involved in an accident. And I did a little research into that. There's quite a few scientific studies now, because as I mentioned, the insurance industry no longer has the Department of the Department of Transportation doing those low impact crashes, but the scientific community is still continuing on with it. And so these attorneys will bring up these studies. I looked into some of these studies and it was really interesting. And I mentioned this as part of the quote unquote thoroughness. An adjuster doesn't have to run down every rabbit trail, or, they just don't. But in part of being thorough, I was looking at some of the studies footnotes and where they got their information. And there was a 2008 study that this 2021 study, I mean, very recent, quoted. And they're like, see, people are really injured as a result of low impact. But this 2008 study that they were quoting had the people who caused the accident not reporting injuries, but the people who were hit did report injuries. And I think that's suspect. So obviously there is a incentive maybe to, say that they were injured. And so I find that whole 2021 study to be suspect.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Well, when it comes to the injury threshold, and this just will be for the benefit, I guess, of new adjusters, but here in New York, for example, you cannot make a tort claim in an auto accident unless you've sustained what they refer to as a serious injury. And that would include death, dismemberment, significant disfigurement, which is usually scarring of some sort, a fracture. So even if you fractured your little pinky, you'd qualify to make a tort claim. Loss of a fetus, permanent loss of use of a body organ, member, function, or system, permanent consequential limitation of the use of a body organ or member, and significant limitation of the use of a body function or system. See, that's a kind of a gray area there, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah. So this is when they'll, maybe they'll have a doctor, maybe they won't, the plaintiff attorney, if there is an attorney involved. And they'll say, so my client is totally disabled from work for 90 days or as a result of this accident. And again, you look at the photographs, you look at common sense, and that's when you ask for your doctor's note.
Yeah, the last threshold in New York here is actually to be disabled from work 90 out of the first 180 days after the accident. And if you can get a doctor to say that you're disabled, medically disabled for 90 days, you're in.
Yeah.
And that's usually what happens here in New York when there's something along the lines of a missed claim about the attorney will usually use that disability trigger for a tort claim.
Yeah. Yeah.
Should we be concerned about doctors who write fake notes to get people out of work?
It's always a suspicious thing, and trying to prove it is hard. What the interesting thing is that you have to pay attention to is looking for rings. And by that, I mean running your claim background check, your ISO, claim check to see if this particular attorney keeps using this particular doctor, if this doctor's name continues to show up over and over and over again for this particular type claim, if this claimant, for example, keeps showing up. over and over and over again. One of the very, very first claims I ever worked was one with a professional claimant. And again, for our younger adjusters, that is a pejorative term, actually, which indicates a person who has multiple accidents. And these multiple accidents are generally on purpose, but to prove that is hard. And that's, of course, when you are going to want to get your SIU or special investigation unit, your fraud unit involved to do a little bit more digging. They've got a little bit more resources than maybe what the average adjuster does at their desk.
Professional claimants don't necessarily have a union card or have it tattooed on their arm. So yeah, a little background work is necessary in a lot of cases.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's how you find them a lot of times is, these doctors and who tend to write these notes. You'll find them being hired over and over and over again by the same attorney.
So we've talked about the use of experts and actually working as an expert to testify in different types of cases. And it is interesting because we'll always get asked, do you mind, testifying on behalf of a plaintiff rather than a defendant, or a policyholder in a suit against an insurance company, because you, Bill, always work for insurance companies. Isn't that a conflict? And the idea there is that no, you want to balance that out. If you're always on the side of one or the other, you're going to be seen as biased. And these doctors, it's the same thing is going to apply. If all they're doing is writing notes for people to avoid work for 90 days, eventually that's got to catch up with them, you would think.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree. And the thing I like about independent, and I used independent adjusters. I was an independent adjuster. And the thing that I like about being a consultant or an expert is I am completely independent. And I get paid regardless of how the claim comes out, is what I always told the attorney when I was trying to settle a claim. I'm like, look, I've been hired by the insurance company, sure, but I can pay you, I can not pay you. I'm still getting paid by the insurance company. It doesn't matter to me if y'all settle or y'all go to suit or whatever. Same thing as a consultant or an expert witness. I give my opinion, and it's up to the jury or the judge to determine who's right, who's wrong. Fortunately, I don't have that kind of power. And so you do look at that. If you've got a doctor who is obviously writing these things and they're biased or whatever, then you've got to take a look. And again, that's part of that suspicious, the S and the missed, but it doesn't mean that we lowball. It doesn't give us permission to do those sorts of things.
And remind me what the second MIST acronym is again. Measure,
measure, investigate, I believe.
investigate, suspicious,
yeah,
suspicion, and what's the T?
T is thoroughness. So
Thoroughness,
it's measure
okay.
and investigate, suspicious, and thoroughness. And I mean, investigate, it's like, well, why do you have to do that? Well, because it's cute. It's nice symmetry. We're talking about missed claims, and then you use the missed.
Well, I see it as kind of a balance. So it is a way to counterbalance that bias that you may be contending with when you, I mean, how many times have you received a notice of loss where the agent spelled out what happened and you're like, well, this is definitely a fraudulent case. And then you talk to the insured and there's like, yeah, this is a fraudulent case. And then you talk to the claimant and it's this little old lady and this thing fell, from 10 feet off the roof and hit her in the head. And she had no idea what happened. And it's not fraud at all.
Yes.
That happens a lot where you're just given a complete 180 once you do a little digging.
Absolutely. And you talked about, you just mentioned, and this is exactly what I told my adjusters when I was a claims manager, is there are two sides to every story. And then in the middle is the truth. I used to ask my new adjusters, how many sides does a coin have? And invariably they would say two. And I said, no, there's actually three, because you've got the side that you can like spin the coin on. There's heads, there's tails, and then you've got the edge,
The
basically.
edge, yeah.
And so when you're looking at what the insured says, oh, this is I barely touched him. I don't know why he's all claiming that he's, walking around with a limp or something like that, versus, let's say, grandma, or in the case of my friend, where the car went underneath the bumper and hit the frame, and so there was more of a jarring impact. They're saying, oh my gosh, I am in so much pain. This is really, really hurting. I am going to have surgery as a result of this claim.
One other thing that comes to mind is that when you're investigating to prove one side of the story, try and investigate to prove the other side of the story too. And then you're really going to see which side wins. Because if you're doing a thorough job on both sides, you're going to find either that middle ground, or you're going to find that one of the sides just doesn't hold any water.
Right.
So I would encourage adjusters who are engaged in liability claims of auto or general liability to do just that. Put yourself in the shoes of the claimant or the plaintiff's attorney and investigate it as if you were trying to prove their case, and then investigate it as if you're trying to refute their case and see who wins.
Right. Because remember, our job is to pay claims. Our job is not to deny claims. Our job is to pay the valid claims. And I think a lot of us forget that. But that's what the policy says. We will pay for these claims that you, as the insured, become legally liable for. So that's what our job is.
One of
But
the accusations leveled against insurance adjusters is that their job is to minimize claims and to lowball. But that's not what we do. Do we come in lower than the demand? Yeah, almost every time. But that's not necessarily our fault. So our job is to come up with something that's fair and find a common ground so that the thing can be resolved.
exactly.
I don't, as an independent adjuster, I don't like to see things go to litigation, because then they leave my office and then I don't get to play with them anymore.
Yeah.
So, and I like investigating claims and handling them. So if it were up to me, I would keep them until we can, reach an agreement. Sometimes we can't, but that's the ultimate goal as an adjuster.
Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree. And I hope that that's what the Art of Adjusting podcast can help adjusters learn.
Absolutely. Thanks for joining us on the Art of Adjusting podcast, where we talk about life as an insurance adjuster.
If you enjoyed this podcast or this episode, please give us 5 stars and a review. It does help the algorithm pick us up.
Hit that subscribe button real quick and tell all of your adjuster friends to check this out as well. For independent adjusting services, go to www.auten.claims. And for anyone interested in working as an independent liability adjuster, go to the Contact Us tab to join our roster.
In the meantime, you can contact me at theartofadjusting.com for consulting and training purposes.